Welcome today to the fantastic Lake John. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're at a favourite venue of mine, Lake John, a venue I've fished probably for 20 years now, and we've come to peg 3 in the car park, nice and close to the van, which is a peg I drew my first competition of the year, 2023, I think it was the 2nd of January, and I won a silverfish match off this peg. I'm going to go through the tactics I used that day and that I use on other similar sized venues. Obviously the rigs, the bait, the feeding, all the important stuff, and hopefully catch a few fish and show you the tactics. Okay, so the baits we've got today for the session are standard sort of silverfish baits. We've got some live red maggots, got some dead red maggots with a few whites in. I think there's an odd white in the reds there, the live ones. Some dead pinkies, got a few casters, not many, I don't need too many casters. And I've got some micro pellets. So these are spotted fin F1 micro pellets, which I really like for skimmers. I use them in the summer, places like Ferry, Meadows and that. So I've got a few of those. I'm going to soak those up, they'll swell up quite quickly. So standard sort of baits for feeding and hooking. Ground bait choice in the winter is really important. So it's January now. We're sort of at rock bottom weather-wise. We've had the freeze, we've had snow, you know, like the lake's been frozen over. We've had a boatload of rain. It's actually been difficult to find a day to come filming because we've been raining all the time. So the water temperature is low. The fish will feel cold when I catch them, if I catch some. So you've got to consider how rich your ground bait is. If you use a 2 fish meal rich mix, you're running the risk of blowing your peg, filling the fish up. The fish will back off it very quickly. So this is a mix I use pretty much once we've had some frosts. I switch to this mix and it's like a safe bet. I know I'm not going to overfeed the fish. If there's a lot of roach in my peg, they're attracted to this mix. If there's skimmers, it's fine too. So it's like take my brain out, just use this mix, and wherever I go, I know it's a safe bet. So the mix comprises of 50% of a natural ground bait. In this case I use spotted fin canal, which is this dark, fine, it's actually, even though it's a sweet non-fish meal ground bait, even this ground bait is a low feed ground bait. So it doesn't have like tons of breadcrumb, tons of biscuit in it. It's got like copra molasses, which is a cocoa bell, sorry, which is like a sort of very neutral ingredient. And it's got quite a strong smell of fenugreek and coriander, which I think in the winter you want quite a smelly ground bait for skimmers. They sort of home in on it a bit better. Maybe that's just something you don't sort of imagine, but that's what I like. So 50% of my mix is spotted fin canal. Then the other 50% is made up of 2 sort of fish meal mixes really. So the first one, so I've got 3 pints here of canal. I've got 2 pints of milled expander, spotted fin milled expander. So that is just pure milled expander. There's no bulking agents. It's literally sacks of expander, go through the mill, come out the other end, get bagged up. And that again is quite well, it's a very low feed. There might be a little bit of fish meal in there, but not a lot. And it's very fluffy, disperses well on the bottom. So that makes up sort of 2 pints of my mix. And the last pint is spotted fin carp, which is a fish meal ground bait, which is quite rich in sort of like, it's got a bit of halibut pellet in it and some sort of pre-digested fish meal and other ingredients. And so that sort of combination of low feed, natural ground bait, expander, and then a bit of fish meal sort of gives me, I feel like, the best of everything, you know, without over the top on anything. So that's one mix that I'm going to mix up. It'll come out darkish due to the dark colour of the canal. My other mix, because I'm going to have 2 mixes today, because I'm going to have about 4 lines on the go, is just pure expander, which I'm going to mix up a minimal amount. I've got about 1.5 pints here, and this is like a contrast to my other ground bait, which quite often, if I'm going to fish pellets exclusively on the line, I will sort of top up with pellets and a nugget of this, which is a common tactic, you know, on lots of places. But today I'm going to feed a line with this, with the milled expander, a few micros and some live maggots as a negative line. So a different type of mix. I'm going to put more of this, be more positive with this mix, more negative with this mix, and we'll see what happened, because it was quite interesting what happened in the match actually. I'm not You know, I'm not sure it's going to be exactly the same because no 2 days fishing are. But so I've got 2 mixes, slightly different, but this is my main mix for the whole of the winter, almost regardless any silverfish match I go on. Peg 3, it's a great peg, commands a lot of water. The pegs each side of it are a fair distance away, and you've got these lovely rush beds down the inside, so you've got some features. And the way this peg is a bit unusual in that it doesn't have a shelf in front of you. It's almost the same depth at 5 metres or 4 metres as it is at 14.5, so you've got no shelf to fish. You've just got a big flat expanse of water. So the first line, the closest line I'm going to fish, is down to the rushes with maggots and casters, and down there I would expect, or I hope, to catch roach, maybe some chunky perch. Could catch a rogue bream down there as well. And what I'm going to do down there is, from the start, I'm just going to feed maggots, and once I start getting some bites I might start introducing some casters as well. I like maggots in winter, to be honest. They seem a bit more consistent to me than casters. So that line sort of takes care of itself. I'm just going to fish a strung out rig. If I do start catching quite a few perch, which I hope I do, we'll have a chat at the time about the depth to fish, because that's quite important, how much over depth you are. So out in the main water I'm going to have 3 lines. So I've plumbed up 14.5, which is what I fished in the match. To be honest, I could probably fish 13 today, but we'll do what I did in the match. So in line with the point of the island at 14.5 metres, I'm going to feed a line with just a small, well, what is for me a small ball of milled expander, with a pinch of micros. These F1 micros are really smelly, and some live maggots. And that's going to be my starting line for a reason I'll explain in a minute. So I'm going to feed another line at 14.5 to my left, in line with the start of the sign on the far bank, and that's going to be a line I feed with my, what I would call my ground bait mix, more positively. I'm going to put a couple of loose pots in to make a little bit of bed, and one sort of decent ball in the middle of it with some dead maggots in and some dead pinkies. And what I like to do, like in the past, I've sort of used to think more along the lines of, shall I put 2 balls in, 4 balls in, 6 balls in. And what I sort of focus a bit more on now, especially on venues where I'm going to catch a lot of fish, is how many dead maggots and pinkies I put in. So I like to sort of measure it out and have a sort of good idea of what I fed on the day for future reference, because I'm fishing these silverfish matches every week. So what I will do is get my, this has had the worms in, so it's a bit yucky, but I'll get my 250ml pot, that's a 1/4 litre pot, and then I'll sort of decide, right, how many, before I think about the ground bait, I think about the maggots. I think, right, so this is going to be my positive line. I'm prepared to wait for the fish to move on to this line, because I've got other lines where I can fish immediately and hopefully start nicking fish. So I quite like to put a volume of dead maggots and pinkies in. So sort of my maximum, what I like to feed is a whole pot of maggots and pinkies, and in that case I will mix it with 4 or 5 pots of ground bait. That's the sort of ratio I work along. So today I think we're pleasure fishing, so the fishing should be okay. In the match I caught £22, right, and £17 was second, £16 was third. There was some 15s and 14s. It was all quite close, so it was important what you did, but the fishing wasn't like bagging, you know what I mean? But that's normal this time of year pretty much everywhere. So what I'm going to go for today, I'm going to put about half a pot of mostly maggots, because I don't want to get too many little fish, a pinch of pinkies on the top, and actually, sorry, I didn't mention, I will put a pinch of micros in as well. So there you go. In the end I probably got 2/3 of a pot of particles. So that is my main focus. When I'm thinking about feeding, I'm thinking about my particles first. Then the proportion of ground bait for that, I would say I'm going to put in 3 pots of my mix. Right, mix that up. So it's rich in particles. But like I say, I'm prepared to leave this line, not fish it too much for the first part of the day. So I want bait there that, you know, if the fish are visiting the area when I'm not fishing it, I don't want them to just clean me out of maggots and there's just a little bit of neat ground bait there. For me, I like to feel that I've got a better bait that fish can move on, or I can do something late in the match over that line to get them in. I'm just going to wet the ground bait down a little bit more. I'll make a ball, you can see how rich. If it was a day and we'd had some frosts and stuff like that, I would cut down the maggots and I'd cut down the ground bait maybe by a potful as well. So there you go. You can see there's lots of maggots in there, and you know, I'm going to put pretty much that down one line, and that is what I would say is my positive line for this time of year. So worms in the winter is like a high risk bait. There's some places, if you put worms in and the water's cold, it's like it can not be good. Alternatively, you can put them in, maybe even if you don't catch on them, you can catch on maggots over the top, and it can catch you some quality fish. So what I've done today, which is what I did in the match, it's easy, because the depth's all the same, I don't need to have hundreds of rigs to cover different lines. I've got a line at 11 metres, 11.5 metres, where I'm going to put basically put some worms in. I'm going to chop up some worms, I'm going to put them in neat with some dead maggots and an odd caster and just a little pinch of ground bait, just a tiny little ball. And that is like a bit of a tester line for me. It's 11 metres, so it's far enough out to catch some quality fish. You know, if I did it at 5 metres, it wouldn't be a true gauge, but I can see what happens. In the match, early on, I did that, and early on I caught a bream that was nearly £3 and an odd roach, right? I didn't catch, and I put more worms in, and after that, it was no good. So that did two things. It attracted a big fish straight away, a bit like it would on a canal, you know, if you put worms down the middle, you'd look for a big fish over it. So it gave me like a bonus fish, a few chunky roach. I put some more worms in when it died, and it never came back. So that told me, don't put worms in on your other lines during the day. Alternatively, if I put more worms in and started catching more fish, well, that obviously would have been a good line for me to fish. And I have got the option to put worms in in my ground bait, really, more than in the milled expander. So it's like it's you asking a question and getting an answer without blowing your peg. I've chopped some worms up pretty fine. One thing I hate is mud on my worms. So I've put them in a little pot to let them settle, admittedly for not that long, and I've got most of the mud off that I can. And it doesn't help because these worms got a bit wet at the weekend, so the peat has gone really claggy. So I've chopped them up, and despite the fact that I've cleaned them off as best as I can, it's still a mixture of mud, of peat and minced worms. I really don't like it. It's in the winter. So what I've been doing a lot recently is just getting them in this little sort of colander style thing, and I have some water here behind me, and just rinse them off. The downside is what you get left with looks a lot less than what you started with, because you got rid of the mud and some of the juices. I'm not too bothered about the juices. You know, some people like washing the juices off. I think, well, the juice is part of the worm, what's wrong with that? But it's the mud that I don't like. So what you can see now is lovely clean worms. Possibly a little bit less attraction because I've rinsed the juice off, but I'd rather get rid of that peat. I'm fishing 5 metres to these rushes. It's right on the limit of where I can throw bait accurately. So just to start it off, I'm just going to pot some maggots in. This line is a little bit of a slow burner. I'm not going to start there because loose feed, it takes a little while for the fish to come in on it, and I expect that line to sort of take a little while to get going. And it's a line I can drop in on and hopefully have little bursts of fish during the day. So I'm just going to pot in about 50 maggots on my spot. Gives me a little visual idea of where to loose feed as well. So they're in there. So my next line is going to be the chop worm line, which is the next closest one. So, nice dollop of worms, like 100mm of mince worms there probably. A few casters, a few dead maggots. Really, you know, it's all about the worms, that line. Oh, and a little nugget of ground bait just as an attractor. The day of the match, it was flat calm, it was beautiful. Today obviously we got the wind, not so easy. So just swish me pot around, spread the worms out a tiny bit, and that's that. So anything could happen there basically. Now my 14.5 metre lines. So I'll feed my negative one first. So probably like 40 maggots. Little ball. Little expander, and I don't know what's there, 100 micros. I like the smell of those micros, I think it really attracts the fish. And then what I've got on the butts of my poles is I've got a bit of electrician's tape. So it's not because the pole's broken, it's basically so I can feed. Probably handy get a close up of this from the other side, but it's about 18 inches up the pole. So I'll put that bit of electrician's tape, I don't know if you can see it here, I hold that in my hand when I pot in. So that's there. Not easy in this wind. Right, and that gives me the option to like sit on the end of my pole and be past my stuff. And today the wind is blowing at us, so my rig will probably come back onto the bait a little bit. So I have got a short dolly butt as well I can add. I don't want to fish miles past my bait, but I do want to have the option to fish just on the far edge of it. So both lines, I will use that tape to tell me where to. So this is my positive line with all the maggots. We'll see what happens today. It might be different to the match, we're on our own. So again, just get a bit of tape in my hand. Put that one in, that's my ball, straight on the edge of the sign. I'm going to I've wetted down the ground bait a bit more, so it's nice and heavy. I'm going to put a full pot of loose in. Just going to put 2 of those in. I don't like, when I put in, I don't sort of spread, you know, if I was going to put like 4 balls in or something, I don't really spread them about that much, because when I fished here in the summer with ground baits and when I've been testing ground baits and stuff on flat days, it's amazing how much the fish knock the ground bait about, because I've seen that when they fizz, you can see sometimes they're fizzing, you can tell your bait's just spread out a lot anyway. So that's one loose one. It should be hopefully another, yeah, that's about it, isn't it? So there's a little bit left in there, but that's basically, it's a 250ml pot, so I've sort of put 750ml of gear in. Just come slightly inside with that one, give it a bit of a swish. That's it. How to start the match. Now, what happened in this match was, some anglers started down the edge to catch an odd little fish, some people started on a feeder, but I get the impression that on some of these lakes, you know, we're here in the week today, there's one other angler. Even though there's not loads of fish feeding, the fish have not had much to eat for up to a week, potentially. So you can quite often get a burst of fish straight away, because the fish are hungry, the bait goes in, they go, wallop, yeah, let's have some of that. And then they'll back off, and then the day will become difficult. So in the match, I started on the negative 14.5 metre milled expander line, and I caught some skimmers. I did lose one or two because they weren't settled, but I had quite a good start, and I think that was the best way to start, because like I say, I think the fish are hungry, the fish are spread out in the lake, they're not, you know, the skimmers aren't close in, they're out, but you know, within pole range, and if you're lucky you can get a quick burst of fish like that even on a difficult day. So we'll see what happens. I'm trying to predict what's going to happen today, but it probably won't, but we'll see. Oh, so I've gone in on the negative line, and I've had to put my dolly butt on straight away because with rigs blowing in. I'm going to shorten my line down a little bit actually. And I've had a little roach as soon as I put the dolly butt on, and I've got my first skimmer, which is great. So it's literally, I've been fishing for 5 minutes and I'm straight into a quality fish. There you go. It's a beauty. Single dead red. Great condition fish, look at that. So a really important piece of equipment, which I'm sure everybody knows anyway, is the spray bar for these conditions. In the match I fished here, I didn't need it, it was flat calm, so I could really hold the flow exactly where I wanted, no problem. But an important thing when you're using a spray bar, obviously you tend to just like put your float out where your bait is and that's where you fish. But skimmers, you know, they can sit off your bait like to the left or to the right of it, especially if there's a bit of tow or the water's a bit deeper than today. So you still need to force yourself to search your peg. So once you start getting a few bites and you feel there's some fish in your peg, it's a good idea, you know, to put your float in 1 foot or 2 foot to the generally the direction the tow's going. So if it's towing to the left, try down your peg a bit. So don't sort of stop thinking about it and just put your rig on top of your bait and not experiment that way, because if you were holding the pole you would do that without realising. You'd be searching a little bit. So it's a great piece of equipment, an essential piece, but you also need to think about what you're doing while you're using it. You know, if you just hold your bait on if you hold your rig on your bait all the time and never go down your peg, you'll never know if anything's there. So we've had a couple of bites, 3 bites. It's quite hard to see the float, but you've got to have your float dotted for this style of fishing. We'll go through the rigs in a bit, but the float I've got has got like a 1.5mm bristle in, and I'd rather fish. I've always fished with like thickish bristles but dotted. I did a video here years ago and it was one of the tips that I sort of said then. We've been fishing a while now, about an hour and a half, and to be honest it's really difficult. The conditions, you can see the wind's got up, it's proving difficult. So I started on the negative milled expander line, and to be fair, I caught a skimmer about £1, a couple of 3 little roach, a nice hand size skimmer about 8 ounces. I foul hooked one, which can happen when you go straight on them. A decent fish, where it felt like it came off. And then I had a look on my worm line, caught a couple of little fish there, but nothing major. And the sun has been shining on the water here, so I haven't really been able to fish down the edge much either. So I've had a look on my positive line as well, and I found looks a good skimmer there which came off, and I've caught some hand size ones. But it's really hard to present a bait. I want to fish with a little float out there, because I know that the fish, they won't really accept a heavy float, but you just can't do it. And it's also hard to tell what amount of fish has been in my peg, because you can't fish properly, you can't present it how you want, you don't get as many bites, so you can't get a feel for what's going on. I have caught some skimmers out there, no real quality ones, and I don't know about this wind, but it seems to have, there's like some little roach feeding, which didn't feed last time I was here. So if you start, like, I've tried like sort of toss potting maggots in, although it's not easy out there, and that seems to attract fish, but the wrong stamp. There's a quality fish down the edge. So this edge, I had my first look on it about half an hour ago probably, and I was getting bites on the drop off little roach, and I caught one decent one about 6 ounces, but it wasn't how I wanted it. It's not what, I want to catch quality fish down there. So what I did, I potted in with the big pot some casters, probably about, I don't know how many there was, just like a small handful in the bottom of the pot. So there's actually some bait on the bottom, because what can happen when you're loose feeding regularly and there's little fish off the bottom, they just eat everything you chuck in, because you're not chucking tons of bait in, you can't. So I wanted to get some bait on the bottom to work over, and I left that, and I've gone in the last sort of 10 minutes, and I've had a skimmer over a pound, I've had a perch probably like 10 ounces, and this fish, whatever this is. So when you fish down the edge, that's something to think about, because other places I've potted in pellets before and then fish maggots over the top, but just having the pellets there in the end has brought some bream in. That was at Fen Farm I did that, and you can do it with fishmeal ground bait as well. Just something extra to what you're doing to get some quality fish. So I put like a handful of casters and some maggots actually. I think this is decent fish anyway, it's having a pop. So it's really difficult. The edge is helping me out, to be honest. I'm hoping my long lines, if the wind just stay like this, it's not too bad, but it gets right up and you're having a nightmare really. I don't know what this is, if it's a hybrid or... It's a big fish. I'm on 08 to an 18. 5 elastic through the whole top kit, that's important. There's a hybrid, look, big hybrid. I thought it might be. That's a bonus. That's £2. So we're making the best of a difficult situation. You're not, I wanted to come here and catch nice skimmers on the long pole, but it's really, really difficult. But so my last 3 fish down the edge, probably gone £3.12. Plus the fish I've caught out. Don't know what's, it's got a reasonable weight. It's just annoying that I can't fish properly. We've chosen the one dry day of the week and it's blown a hoolie. But anyway, that's winter. Was this forecast, this wind? It was, I mean, how strong? 14 mile an hour it said, didn't it? Mind you. Yeah. Right, so I've got another. Switch the camera off, switch it straight back on again because I've got another little skimmer, another lift bite. So patience is a virtue with this type of fishing. These fish you sort of got to wait for them to feed when they want to without blasting your peg to bits. So hopefully, I'm hoping there'll be some fish on the positive line. The sun's going to come round now and block my view on that side. So it's all against us, but we're catching. It's a good venue, so you know we're enjoying it's probably a strong phrase. But catching a few fish. So back down the edge from it's only actually my third look down here because we lost the first hour because of the sun. The fishing's improved a little bit on the long pole. Don't think it's a coincidence that it's clouded over because before it was cloudy 1 minute, sunny the next, kept changing. I don't think that sort of encouraged the skimmers particularly, but now it's clouded over. I can actually see my float a bit better. And I had a little run of skimmers out there, which considering the type of day it is, I was quite happy with. Come back down this edge. I potted in, before I came off it, I potted in another small handful of casters and a few maggots. I've been trying to loose feed down there, but having to use a catapult and it's not easy. And I've just gone in and I've just missed like 3 bites on the drop off little fish, which is not what I want. So if I don't get a run of better fish here, I'm going to either put some worms down there or a little bit of ground bait or something just to try and drag in something better quality. I mean, it's hard fishing. I could fish for these little roach and that, but like this, I don't want to really. I just want to catch better fish, get a better weight. I've got this rig strung out. I've got 3 11s and I've got some 10s. I'm going to bulk it up a bit because I'm just getting too many bites on the drop. Before I came off my milled expander line, I put another ball in, what I would call a reasonable ball, a little sort of satsuma, a bit smaller than a satsuma probably, with quite a few dead maggots and pinkies in it. More pinkies than maggots because the last little run of fish I caught was on double pinky. Wind's still blowing. Be glad to get indoors today, later on. Right, let's see. So I've had that one little run of when I had that hybrid, a dumpy perch, another little hybrid down there. I sort of want another spell like that, but I'm getting too many bites of little fish here. Sometimes these better fish are just sort of swim in and you just catch them in the middle of the other. When I fished a matcher, you had to like persevere for like 5-10 minutes feeding, and then you'd get an odd better fish like that. What that is, if it's a roach or it's a decent fish. Just hanging on. That was a big roach. That is a big roach, look at that. Where is it? Nice. Look at that. That was on maggot. So I've had a run of fish off my right hand milled expander line, and I've topped it up, and it sort of died really. But that's what happens a lot in the winter when you're fishing for skimmers. You get like one good run of fish, and today a good run of fish has been like 6 fish. And then whether you top it up negative or you top it up positive, it never really comes back ever again the same. So this is what happened in the match for me, and how I had a good finish. Basically my ground bait line, I didn't hardly top it up at all. Well, I didn't top it up at all in the first sort of 3 3/4 hours of the match. I could drop in there and catch a little skimmer or a little roach. It was somewhere to go, but it was never brilliant. But I deliberately didn't top it up. And my milled expander line, I was a little bit, well, I was more aggressive on that until I sort of got the fish there. And like today, I had a good little run of these size skimmers. And once I'd had that run, just on the end of getting them, I put a big ball of milled expander with dead maggots and pinkies on top of my ground bait line, because I felt like that's what they had come to initially, that's what they wanted to be over. And this happens a lot on this time of year, that what you do on one line affects the other line. So I sort of did it on the day as a gamble, because I just thought, right, I'll just stick that over there. But I sort of half knew, well, I sort of had an inkling what was going to happen. And what happened was my milled expander line never came back any good, and I don't think it would have done anyway. But I had a good finish on my ground bait line, because the fish had obviously backed off where I'd been catching them and went and settled on this other line. And because I hadn't sort of been topping it up all day, I just left it alone. I think that was just, it just seemed to work really well on the day. And now the same thing's happened here now, in that the line I was catching off, I've topped up, you know, the fish have gone, so I've topped it up how I did before they came, and it just doesn't seem any good. So but at the same time I put a big ball on this other line, and it's worked out the same way. Okay, so just going to go through my setup, the rigs for today. Got a Preston 5 slick elastic on all my 4 top kits, 012 main line on all my rigs. This is my caster maggot rig down the edge. I've got a 0.3 sci-Y punch with a hollow tip, thin wire stem. Still, even though it's got a wire stem, it still fishes well on the drop. It's actually 6 foot deep down the edge, so it's very deep. I've got 3 11s and some 10s, trimming shot. I've tightened that up today because there's little fish at mid-water which I'm trying to avoid. I've got 09 fluorocarbon to a Hydra IM 8013 barbless black hook, and these hooks have just released pre-tied 6 inches on a card, 10 hooks, like I say, fluorocarbon, which is good because it's slightly rigid, less visible in water, but especially if you're catching perch down the edge, the hardness of the line gives it less chance of getting cut off on the top lip of the perch. So that's my setup for down the edge. Now I set up 3 rigs for long, but obviously the wind's got up and it's limited what I've been able to do. So the first rig is a 414s, which has been too light, but I set it up because this was one of the rigs I used in the match. And these little skimmers, they really appreciate a light rig. They don't like lead down the line. And this has just got strung out 10s, really similar to the caster rig, 11s and 10s in a little tapered strung out sort of Italian style shot in pattern. Same hook and hook length, pre-tied, same elastic, 012 main line. But like I say, I couldn't really use that rig. I couldn't. You need to be able to flick your rig past the tip of your pole, and it's just too light. So this is my third rig, 4/16s. The float actually for long is a Hydra Pro 21. It's carbon stem, hollow tip, 1.5mm I think that is, slim body. And even though it's carbon stem, it actually sits well in the wind. It's quite stable despite its slim profile. And this rig I wanted to use with a 4-inch hook length, because these little skimmers, they're hard to see the bites. If you have a shot quite near the hook, that helps. But just, it was no good. The conditions are too rough. So to try and fish with a light rig, 4/16s was too light as well really. I changed the rig. I put this hook length on here, which is, well, it's probably 40 centimetres long. I tied it up to an 18 hook again, and I put a number 12 on it, and I set it so it was like this far over depth with that little shot on the bottom, and the last shot of my strung out tapered pattern just off the bottom, just to try and fish light and sort of combat the conditions. And it is a rig that does work really well on occasion, especially for bigger fish. I did catch 1 or 2 on it, but to be honest, I was struggling really to flick it out, and to be fair, when I tried it, there wasn't actually many fish in my peg, but I did catch a noddin on it. It was better than trying to fish with a 4-inch hook length, that's for sure. And this is the rig I've really caught most of my fish on long. Same elastic, number 5, 012 main line, same float, Pro 21, in 0.75, which is heavier. Even though it's 6 foot deep, that is heavier than I'd ideally like to fish. And basically I've got a bulk, 3 droppers, number 10s, again 6-inch hook length, and I've had to fish that sort of like getting on for 5 inches over depth. So that last shot was just off the bottom, and I've had quite a few lift bites, and importantly I've been able to flick that bulk out past my pole tip, sit on my spray bar, put the tip in the water, and it's got sort of half decent presentation. It wasn't perfect because the wind's gusting. So I've had to, you know, I haven't fished with how I'd want to fish, but the conditions have dictated that, and that's been my 4 rigs. So another detail regarding the float, I've got a tray of these Pro 21s, and I've made them all up on yellow tips. And I don't really fish with a yellow tip, to be honest, but the reason is I like to use the Hydra paint, today black obviously, and I just paint like 2/3 of the tip. The reason being, so I'll be trimmed up wherever I am depending on what I can see. If I get a lift bite, when that yellow bit lifts up, it really makes it double obvious. You know, you can tell anyway, but it's like you're just like, oh yeah, that is definitely a lift bite. So that's a nice sort of little tip. You can paint it orange, you know, I quite often have that bit orange and a little bit of yellow, just a contrast to show the lift bites. One winter tip that I can give you is, regarding your hook bait, is to try flavours. I don't really put them in the ground bait or additives, things like that, but I like to have a little bait box with, today we're using dead maggots and pinkies mostly, and I put a bit of liquid or booster spray on them. Spotted fin do sweet ones, spicy ones, there's loads of different ones available. And to be honest, in the winter I always have some on my side tray. They're very good on the feeder and the pole. If you've had a run of fish on unflavoured hook baits, you can often put a hook flavoured one on and catch another couple of fish out of that little spell. And it's something that you can experiment with, and sometimes it doesn't make any difference and they don't work, and different flavours seem to work on different venues. I don't carry many. I carry like a spicy one, I carry a sweet one, and that's about it. And either, you know, I try one or the other, and I know certain venues the sweet one's better, and I know certain venues the spicy one's better, and it's just a nice little edge, and it will catch you some fish because the water's coloured. And like I said in the beginning, I like a ground bait that's smelly, but with a natural smell. I don't want to put liquid in it to make it smell. So in the case of my ground bait, it's coriander and fenugreek, which is great. So that's a little tip worth trying. It's a bit of fun. You can mess around with it when you go fishing and find something that works for you. Okay, so the session's finished. It's been testing, to say the least. Managed a bream in the end, down the edge. I put a little ball of ground bait in with some chopworm and caster in it, and just sort of didn't loose feed as much. Dropped in there on a maggot and caught one last chuck, so that's a bonus. Beautiful roach, quite a few skimmers, got over 20 pound, probably slightly more than what I had in the match, but we are pleasure fishing, but the conditions have really sort of killed us. I've had this fish here, I'm not sure what this is, if it's a rudd bream hybrid. It's got funny colourings, but anyway, that's commercials, there's a bit of everything in them. So yeah, really enjoyable fishing. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Tried to pass on some tips. Been a bit limited by the conditions, but it's been a great day's fishing, no doubt. And these are the type of fish you catch at Lake John now. There's less big bream, there's more sort of medium-sized fish.